My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 44 years old. For most of my life, I've been the steady one in the family, the quiet provider, the one everyone turned to when things fell apart. After my dad passed, I helped my mother stay in the family home. She couldn't afford the mortgage alone, so I stepped in, put my name on the loan, paid the bills, handled the upkeep. I never asked for anything in return. I figured that's what family does. You carry the weight so others don't have to. I never imagined they'd use that comfort to shut me out. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when my mum called. Her voice had a rehearsed calm, like she'd practiced this in the mirror. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about the holidays," she said. I assumed it was the usual timing, food, who was bringing what. Instead, she took a breath and dropped a line. "I'll never forget. We all agreed. It's better if you don't come this year." My heart didn't drop. It stalled. We all agreed. My mother, my brother, my sister, the people I sacrificed for. They'd sat around and decided I wasn't welcome. She rattled off some excuses, said I was always too intense, that I made everyone feel judged, that the atmosphere was lighter without me. I said nothing, not out of shock, but because I realized she wasn't asking. This was already decided. I wasn't invited. I was dismissed, and she wanted it to sound gentle, like a group consensus, like a kindness. But there's no gentle way to say, "You don't belong here anymore." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself. I just said, "All right, that's all." She paused, probably expecting resistance. When none came, she hung up quickly. What she didn't know was that the house she was trimming with lights, the place they'd all be gathering without me, wasn't truly hers. Not fully. The mortgage, in both our names. The monthly payments, mine. The repairs, the taxes, the roof over their heads, me. But people get comfortable confusing help with obligation. They start thinking your silence means you'll never speak. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened the documents. 14 years of payments. 14 years of invisible service. My name, printed right beside hers. I stared at it like I was seeing it for the first time, not as proof of love, but as leverage. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want revenge, not in the obvious way. What I wanted was distance, and I finally had a reason to take it. So I started a new file on my laptop. I called it Final Winter. I poured a glass of bourbon and made my first note: stop paying. The mortgage, they wanted a Christmas without me. That's fine, but they were about to learn what that really meant. I spent that first week in a kind of quiet fog. Not sadness, not even anger, just a steady hum of clarity. I didn't reach out to my siblings. I didn't try to defend myself. I'd learned something in that phone call that went beyond rejection. They had never really seen me, not the real me. To them, I was a utility, a dependable line item in the family system. I had been loyal out of love, but loyalty without respect is just servitude, and I was done playing that part. The strange thing was, once I accepted it, I felt free. I started remembering moments I'd ignored, conversations I brushed off, little digs at family dinners, side glances when I offered to help. My brother, Daniel, once joked that I acted like Dad's replacement. I'd laughed it off, but now I saw it. I hadn't just helped. I'd filled a void they resented me for filling. They needed me, but they hated needing me. And that resentment had been growing, fed by my silence, my steady presence, my refusal to collapse like the rest of them. I started pulling back, subtly, quietly. I cancelled auto-pay on the mortgage, switched the bills over to paper statements, and routed them to my own address. I knew my mother wouldn't notice right away. She hadn't looked at a financial document in years. That was always my job. I made sure things worked, stayed running, stayed warm. But when you remove yourself from a machine, it doesn't stall instantly. It sputters, slowly, and I wanted her to feel that slow sputter. I kept showing up to work, kept nodding at my neighbors, kept living my life. Outwardly, nothing changed. But inside, I was grieving a version of family I'd been loyal to for too long. People always talk about betrayal like it's sudden, one moment, one action. But the truth is, betrayal is quiet. It's 100 little choices stacked on top of each other, until finally someone decides you're disposable. They just forgot one thing. Christmas came and went. I didn't hear from anyone, not even a text, and strangely, it didn't hurt. Not the way I thought it would. I cooked my own dinner, poured myself a drink, and sat in front of the fire with an old photo album. I wasn't alone. I was just done pretending I wasn't. Then, on New Year's Day, I got a call from the bank. Mortgage past due. I smiled. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because it had begun. Not revenge, just a shift. A reminder that the things they'd taken for granted weren't theirs by right. They were mine. And now, I was reclaiming them. The notice from the bank wasn't aggressive yet. It was one of those politely worded warnings. Your payment has not been received. I knew how the system worked. You get 30 days before they mark it late, 60 before the penalties stack, 90 before the real consequences start to surface. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone. I just wanted to observe what happened when I removed the silent scaffolding I'd been holding up for over a decade. What would they do when the ground beneath them shifted? By mid-January, I got the first call. It was my sister, Emma. Her voice was all sweetness, like she was testing the waters. Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you since. Well, you know, I let her talk. She danced around the topic of Christmas, threw in a few jokes about how Mum was a little dramatic. Then she slipped in the real reason. Hey, random question. Did you know if the mortgage company switched their payment system or something? Mum got some weird mail. I paused. Then I said flatly, I stopped paying. Silence. Long, brittle silence. What do you mean? She asked, suddenly not so sweet. I mean exactly what I said, I replied. I'm not paying it anymore. She stammered, asked if I was okay. Tried to make it about my mental state. That's when I realized she thought I needed a reason. A breakdown, a crisis. But this wasn't chaos. It was control. I'm fine, I said calmly. I just no longer see the point in contributing to something I'd been excluded from. I could almost hear her heartbeat through the phone. Then she hung up. No goodbye, just an end. 2 days later, I got a message from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even acknowledgement. It was a spreadsheet. No subject line. Just an email with columns and cells, amounts due, projected shortfalls, urgency. She hadn't spoken to me since cutting me out of Christmas, but now she expected me to resume the role I was clearly born into, the fixer, the one who shoulders the load in silence. I closed the email without replying. I wanted them to sit with the consequences, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Growth doesn't come from being rescued. What they didn't realize was that I'd already met with a lawyer. Months before the holidays, I'd begun questioning what would happen if I stepped away. The lawyer confirmed what I suspected. If I stopped paying, the house would go into default. But since I was a co-owner, I had options: sell my share, force a sale, or simply let the system run its course until the bank came knocking. Either way, I wasn't trapped. They were. I kept my routine. I worked. I cooked. I slept well. And in the background, the structure began to creak. I'd built that house into something safe and livable. I'd made it home. But they were about to learn what happens when the foundation decides to walk away. Not out of vengeance, but out of quiet, deliberate freedom. By February, the panic began to show. My brother Daniel reached out next, not with warmth, but with that tone people use when they're trying to stay polite while barely holding back frustration. Look, Marcus, I don't know what happened between you and Mom, but this whole mortgage thing, it's not fair to her. I let him talk. He blamed her age, her stress, even her memory, everything but her choices. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see if the truth ever crossed his lips. It didn't. So, when he finally asked, "Can't you just help for a couple more months?" I responded with a question of my own, who agreed I wasn't welcome at Christmas. He was quiet. Then came the deflection. "It's not that we didn't want you there. It's just, you always bring this energy, man. Like you're judging everyone." I nodded slowly to myself. There it was. Not just rejection, but the expectation that I would still serve them after being cast out. I told him calmly, if my presence is a burden, then my support should be too. He didn't like that. Said I was being vindictive. I smiled. There's nothing more unsettling to entitled people than boundaries presented without emotion. A week later, I got another email. This time from the mortgage company, official notice of delinquency. I knew my mother must have received the same. Still, no call, no apology, just silence, as if they were trying to fix the situation behind the scenes. Maybe they thought I'd cave, that I'd swoop in last minute like I always had, because that's what Marcus does. But they forgot something essential. I didn't owe them that version of me anymore. The house became their prison. They couldn't refinance without my signature, couldn't sell without my cooperation, couldn't afford the payments without my income, and yet they still wouldn't say my name unless it was behind closed doors. I began to receive second-hand updates from a cousin, from a neighbor. My mother was stressed. Emma was snapping at the kids. Daniel was drinking more than usual. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just listened, because the damage wasn't mine. It was theirs, built on the foundation of arrogance and assumption. I remember one evening in March, sitting on my balcony, watching the lights of the city below. I thought about all the holidays I spent in that house, cooking, fixing things, paying for last-minute gifts they couldn't afford, and how they'd discarded me like an employee who no longer served their needs. But now they were learning something I had learned years ago. People don't remember what you gave, they only remember when you stop. And I had stopped, completely, quietly, permanently. There was no fight, no argument, no explosion. Just a man stepping out of the shadows of obligation, while the ones who took him for granted scrambled in the ruins he left behind. By early April, the cracks had become canyons. A notice of intent to foreclose was mailed out. The official kind registered, stamped with legal language thick enough to choke someone unprepared. I didn't celebrate. I just marked the date on my calendar. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. And the truth was, for the first time in decades, I was making decisions that didn't revolve around keeping everyone else comfortable. They wanted a holiday without me. I gave them a future without me. Emma finally showed up at my apartment one evening. No warning. Just a knock at the door, and her standing there, looking thinner, brittle. She tried to smile, but it cracked too easily. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in, but didn't offer tea, didn't ask how she was. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she said, "You're really going to let them lose the house?" I looked at her, long and steady. "I'm not letting anything happen. I'm just no longer preventing it." She blinked, like she didn't understand the difference. Maybe she didn't. For years I'd been their invisible safety net. No one asked how I managed it, working overtime, skipping vacations, living modestly so they could live freely. I wasn't bitter, just aware, and now that awareness had turned into action. Emma tried tears next. She brought up childhood memories, told me how Mum's not well, how Daniel isn't handling things. She listed their struggles like receipts, hoping I'd find them worth the cost of myself again. But I had no anger to give her, just quiet resolve. I offered years of peace, I said, and you all chose distance. I'm just respecting that choice. She stood slowly, realizing her usual weapons, guilt, sentiment, pity, had no power here, and as she left, I could see the weight of it landing on her. Marcus isn't coming back, not the version they used anyway. By May, the house was officially listed as in jeopardy. They tried scrambling for solutions, calling relatives, speaking to banks, even trying to remove me from the mortgage. But the paper trail was too solid, my signature too necessary. The silence I'd maintained for months had spoken louder than any argument ever could. I had become the ghost in their foundation, felt, but unreachable. It was around that time my lawyer sent over the final documents. I had options now. We could force a sale or settle the loan out. I chose neither. I let the system keep working, let the machine run until the gears stripped themselves bare, not because I wanted them punished, but because I wanted them sober. Sober to what happens when the person you push out is the same person holding it all together. By June, the bank took formal action. I received a notice that foreclosure proceedings had officially begun. I didn't flinch. I simply folded the letter and placed it in a file marked closure. I didn't need to do anything else. The system was already moving forward, and I was no longer holding the reins. The house that once symbolized family, safety, and shared memories was now nothing more than a monument to what happens when love is mistaken for labor and labor mistaken for duty. I never went back. Not once. Not even when I heard that they'd finally packed up. I was told my mother moved into a condo somewhere on the outskirts of town, smaller, quieter, and entirely hers to manage. Daniel moved in with a friend. Emma, I heard, was renting again. They were scattered, and for the first time in their lives, self-reliant. They'd survived, maybe even grown, but they did it without my name holding the ceiling above their heads. One evening in July, I sat in a quiet cafe with a pen and notebook. I made a list of all the things I'd put on hold over the years. The trip to Barcelona I never took, the business I once dreamed of starting, the weekends I gave away to plumbing repairs and paint cans. Then I wrote something that made my hand tremble for a second. I'm allowed to be free, not in theory, in practice. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was just awake. People asked me later, how did you stay so calm? Why didn't you yell or fight back? And I always answered the same way, because silence is what made them comfortable. And silence is what made them uncomfortable when I used it for myself. There's power in restraint, power in saying I don't need to destroy you to reclaim myself. I just need to leave. In the end, I didn't get revenge. I got distance. I didn't get apologies. I got peace. I didn't get my seat back at the table. I got the freedom to build my own. And for the first time in years, I sat at it alone and didn't feel lonely. I felt sovereign, complete, unapologetically mine. The house? It's gone now. Just another listing in a database. But I don't think of it often. What I remember more clearly is that phone call before Christmas, the cold dismissal, the false consensus, and how that one moment, that one line, we all agreed, taught me everything I needed to know. I was never one of them. I was something far rarer, the foundation, and when I walked away, the walls remembered.